You're at a gathering with people you genuinely care about, you're laughing, telling a story, and on the surface, everything is perfect. But later, driving home, there is this heavy, unexplainable weight sitting on your chest. You are surrounded by people who love you, and somehow you still feel like no one's home.
Yeah, it's this very quiet kind of ache, and it's profoundly common, even if, well, it rarely gets talked about in the open.
Right, and you realize you didn't just have a bad night. You're experiencing this massive, gaping sense of emotional distance. You're sitting in your car wondering, how can I be surrounded by friends and a partner, yet feel completely invisible?
Oh, absolutely. And to even begin dissecting this, we really have to clearly name the tension at play here, because there is a vast difference between social loneliness and emotional loneliness.
I mean, social loneliness is just a numbers game, right?
Yeah. Right, exactly. It's lacking a network, literally just being physically alone. But emotional loneliness is a completely different animal. It's craving a sense of connection, understanding, and feeling deeply valued, but not getting it. And that happens regardless of how many people are sitting in the living room with you.
Yeah, and when you're stuck in that feeling, there are really two honest ways to interpret it. My instinct, and I think the internal felt experience for most people, is to immediately internalize it.
You blame yourself.
Completely. You think, I must be fundamentally flawed. I must be unlovable as I actually am. So my only option is to put on this metaphorical mask to be accepted. I have to perform.
Which makes total sense from a purely emotional standpoint. But if we look at the physiological and psychological reality, the second reading tells a different story.
Okay, what does the second reading say?
It says your nervous system is functioning perfectly. It is registering a lack of genuine emotional attunement. It's perceiving a survival threat, basically a lack of safety, that has likely been wired into your hardware since childhood. Yeah, so you aren't flawed. Your body is just accurately reporting a lack of deep, authentic connection.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because holding both of those ideas at once, that you feel entirely broken, but your brain is actually working exactly as it should, is a lot to process. If you like sitting with questions that don't resolve easily, you're in the right place.
We're definitely getting into the weeds today.
We are. In this deep dive, we're pulling from developmental neuroscience, some sweeping demographic data from the Growth from Knowledge Group, and massive relationship studies. We want to figure out why our modern fixes for loneliness are failing us.
And to do that, we really need to look at this through those two distinct lenses, the relational and the psychological, just to understand how they feed into each other.
Let's start with that felt relational lens, this mask we wear. Because when I look at the behavioral research here, it shows that to protect ourselves from the very real pain of rejection, we adopt these incredibly sophisticated survival strategies.
We definitely do.
Like, we default to people-pleasing. We become hyper-independent. We strive for absolute exhausting perfectionism. Essentially, we become the low-maintenance friend or the highly functional partner who never seems to need anything from anyone.
Right, the person who's always fine.
Exactly. It's like having a beautifully decorated house where all the doors are locked from the inside. People admire it, but no one is actually allowed in.
That imagery is perfect. It captures the exact barrier at play. But to look at the psychological and research lens, we have to ask why we felt the need to install those locks in the first place.
Where do the locks come from?
Well, this brings us to one of the most critical concepts in understanding emotional isolation, which is covert emotional neglect, or CEN.
Covert emotional neglect. So not obvious abuse.
No, not at all. This often happens in what look like perfectly fine families. The lawn was mowed, the homework was checked, the bills were paid, you had warm coats in the winter.
The practical needs were met.
Completely met. But emotional attunement, which is a genuine active curiosity from a caregiver about your inner life, was absent.
So we're talking about the wound of what didn't happen. It's the absence of something essential. Like, if you came home from school looking sad, no one asked what was wrong.
Exactly. Or if you were angry, you were just told to go to your room until you could be pleasant again.
Right. Just fix the behavior, ignore the feeling.
That is the exact mechanism. And Dr. Daniel Siegel's research in developmental neuroscience shows just how profound that absence is. When emotional attunement is consistently missing, the developing right brain literally does not build robust emotional regulation capacity.
Wait, so it physically affects brain development?
Yes. A caregiver's physical presence in the house just isn't enough. They need to perceive, make sense of, and respond to the child's internal state. When they don't, the child's brain learns a brutal lesson.
Which is what?
That my inner world does not matter, and it is a burden to others.
Oh, that is heavy.
It is, and this leads directly to adults who are spectacular at relational management, like they can run a complex household or a Fortune 500 boardroom, but who are utterly starved for true intimacy because they never learned how to let someone witness their internal state.
And we can actually see this isolation mapped onto the brain. You brought up the research out of the University of Chicago, led by Dr. John Cacioppo, looking at how emotionally isolated brains react to social stimuli.
Yes, fascinating study.
It really is. When they showed participants photos of pleasant social settings, the people experiencing emotional loneliness showed significantly less activity in the ventral striatum and the temporoparietal junction.
Which sounds very technical, I know.
Right. Wait, let me translate that real quick. So the ventral striatum is the reward center, right? And the temporoparietal junction manages empathy.
You got it.
So does that mean when I'm emotionally lonely, I literally lose the biological ability to feel connected to the people smiling at me?
Hmm.
They're smiling, inviting me in, and my brain just drops the signal.
That is precisely what is happening under the hood. The signal drops. Your brain is fundamentally processing social connection differently.
Because it's trying to protect you.
Yes. Because your nervous system is in a protective, defensive state, the typical reward of socializing just doesn't register. You can cognitively know you are at a fun party, but your brain chemistry is not giving you the corresponding hit of warmth and connection.
Which completely shatters our cultural assumption about who is lonely. I mean, we always picture the elderly living alone, isolated in an armchair. But that's not what the data shows at all.
Not at all. The demographic reality is incredibly revealing. In a nationally representative sample of U.S. adults tracked meticulously by the Growth from Knowledge Group, they found something really surprising.
What did they find?
Well, while the elderly do experience social loneliness, emotional loneliness heavily peaks among 30 to 44-year-olds.
Wow, 30 to 44.
Yeah, and it strongly correlates with lower income, having a high school degree or less, and not being married or cohabiting.
Think about that for a second. You're in your 30s or early 40s, supposedly the absolute prime of your life, the peak of your career building and socializing years. And that is exactly when the emotional isolation hits the hardest.
It's a huge paradox.
It is, but it makes sense when you consider the pressure cooker of that age. You lose the built-in social structures of school, the stakes of life get higher, and suddenly you're expected to just have it all together.
Right, the transition from the collective we of young adulthood to the highly individualistic I of full adulthood leaves so many people stranded. And, this doesn't just happen to single people. This isolation invades our closest, most intimate relationships.
Oh, the relationship data we pulled on this is staggering. There was this review by Empathy of over 40,000 people who took their relationship quiz.
40,000 is a massive sample size.
Huge. And they were trying to diagnose what was failing in their partnerships. Do you know what the most painful emotion was in a struggling relationship?
Most people would guess anger.
Right? Anger, resentment, jealousy. But it wasn't. It was feeling alone. You were sharing a bed with someone, sharing a mortgage, sharing a life, and feeling more invisible than if you were entirely single.
Which forces us to look at how two people get trapped in that specific dynamic. It's a recognizable pattern we can call the isolated suffering bubbles.
The isolated suffering bubbles. Tell me about that.
Well, you typically have one partner playing the relentless lover. They reach out, demand connection, and pursue their partner, driven by a deep-seated, often unconscious fear of abandonment.
Okay, so they're the pursuer.
Right, but that very pursuit, that intensity, triggers the other partner, the reluctant lover, who withdraws and shuts down. And that's usually out of a profound fear of inadequacy. They feel like they're constantly failing their partner's emotional tests, so they retreat to survive.
It's like Chinese finger traps. The harder the relentless lover pulls to get closer, the tighter and more traps the reluctant lover feels, so they pull away even harder. One chases, one runs, and both are drowning in their own private suffering, completely assuming the other person is fine.
They're basically throwing emotional boomerangs at each other. The very strategy they are using to soothe their own pain guarantees the continuation of the other person's pain.
Okay, I have to push back here.
Right.
Because society's entire model for curing loneliness is basically put yourself out there.
Oh, yeah. Join a club. Network.
Right. Go to a networking event, get on social media, text your friends more. So what does this all mean for our modern fixes? Is
Hmm.
trying to cure this with small talk or social media like drinking salt water? You're surrounded by connections, but you're
Yeah.
actually just making yourself thirstier.
That is such a perfect way to phrase it.
Yeah.
Yes, because there is a stark chemical reality to how our bodies process connection.
Meaning our brains know the difference.
Absolutely. Shallow contact, like making small talk at a party or just being physically near people, does not release oxytocin. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone, and it actively downregulates the stress response in your amygdala. It's what makes you feel safe.
So small talk doesn't trigger it.
No, your brain requires genuine vulnerability to trigger that release. Your nervous system is far too smart to be tripped by small talk. It knows the difference between someone clicked like on my photo and someone truly sees and accepts the messy reality of who I am.
Why?
So yeah, trying to cure emotionless loneliness with small talk is exactly like drinking salt water. You are surrounded by water, but you are actively making yourself thirstier.
It really is the profound difference between being merely perceived and being truly known.
Yes, and to take that a step further, when we look beyond just relationships, we hit a deeper structural layer called existential isolation.
Existential isolation. That sounds intense.
It is. This isn't just about feeling misunderstood by your partner or your friends. It's the subjective, unshakable sense that your exact worldview, your sensory experience of reality, is entirely unshared by anyone else. You feel fundamentally alone in your own mind.
And looking at the data, this hits certain groups much harder. It's not
Mhm.
distributed equally.
Not at all. Research indicates that men consistently score higher on existential isolation scales than women.
Why is that?
Well, it's largely because societal norms frequently enforce agentic, self-reliant values in men, the lone wolf myth, while actively punishing them for communal or vulnerable behaviors.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's also much more prevalent in highly individualistic cultures compared to collectivist ones, where the concept of a self-made person actively blocks genuine interdependence. And crucially, it heavily impacts marginalized or non-normative groups.
Like justice-involved individuals, people in the LGBTQ community, or autistic individuals.
Exactly. If you're autistic living in a deeply neurotypical world or queer in a highly conservative town, you are constantly filtering your baseline experience of reality just to navigate the day.
You don't have a choice.
Right. You aren't just choosing to wear a mask. Society has demanded you wear one for your physical, economic, or social safety. When the world constantly tells you that your everyday sensory or emotional experience of reality is wrong or different, your existential isolation skyrockets. Because your true self is literally never mirrored back to you in daily interactions.
More people carry both sides of this than you'd think. We all have that fundamental human hunger to belong, warring with the terrifying reality that we are ultimately trapped inside our own subjective experience.
And that tension is exactly what we have to learn to sit with. We don't have to force a tidy resolution here. This isn't a puzzle to be solved.
Right. And sitting with it has to start with completely removing the shame. Like if you are listening to this and realizing you're wearing that mask, that you are the architect of that beautiful house with the locked doors, you need to know your mask was an incredibly intelligent adaptation.
It really was.
If you grew up in a covertly neglectful family, where emotions were treated as problems to fix, or where vulnerability was viewed as a burden, hiding was exactly how you survived. You did what you had to do to maintain whatever fragile connection you had with your caregivers. It wasn't a flaw. It was a brilliant survival strategy.
Recognizing that intelligence is vital. But we also have to recognize the paradox of safety.
The paradox of safety.
Yeah, the mask provides protection from rejection, yes. But that exact same protection is what is causing the profound loneliness today. The safety mechanism from your childhood has become your adult prison.
That is so brutally true.
But the good news is you don't have to rip the mask off all at once. In fact, therapeutically, you really shouldn't. Doing that would completely overwhelm your nervous system.
So how do you lower the defenses without sending your brain into a total panic? Like, what's the practical step?
The clinical approach is called graduated disclosure. You test the waters with small, low-stakes truths. You don't have to trauma dump on a first date or tell your coworker your deepest fears.
Right, keep it manageable.
Exactly. Instead of an automatic, I'm fine, you might say to a trusted friend, I'm actually feeling a bit overwhelmed by this project. Or you might admit a minor mistake to your partner without over-apologizing and spiraling.
Just a tiny crack in the door.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a tiny crack. And when that person responds with warmth or validation instead of judgment or abandonment, your nervous system learns incrementally that it won't be rejected for being real.
I really love that. It gives you agency over the process. It reminds me of the drawbridge model you see in a lot of modern relationship therapy.
Oh, yes, the concept of autonomy without exile.
Right.
Many people, especially those who experienced emotional neglect, think the only two options in life are a solid stone wall, which is total protective isolation or total fusion, where you completely lose your identity and merge with someone else just to feel safely connected.
But you don't need a stone wall, and you don't need to give up your borders. You need a drawbridge. You can lower it to let people in for true, vulnerable connection when you feel safe, and you can raise it when you need healthy solitude.
Yes, because we really need to distinguish solitude from loneliness.
They aren't the same thing at all.
Not at all. Solitude is welcomed aloneness. It is completely necessary for self-development, for creativity, and for resting your nervous system. A functioning drawbridge means the path to connection is always there. You are separate, you are an individual, but you are not abandoned.
So, when we pull all of this together, what are we really looking at? If we look at the larger meaning here, evolving past emotional loneliness isn't just about learning a few communication hacks. It is fundamentally about identity.
It really is.
And honestly, it involves a deep sense of grief, the grief of growth. Because when you stop being the heavily managed, perfectly curated, low-maintenance version of yourself, you're going to disrupt the ecosystem of your life. You're going to challenge the relationships that were built entirely on that smaller, quieter version of you.
And we have to be honest here, some of those relationships won't survive your transition to authenticity.
Yeah, that's the hard truth.
People who benefited from your lack of boundaries might walk away. And that is a painful but completely necessary reality to face on the path to genuine connection.
It is painful.
Mm.
But it's the only way to satisfy that fundamental human hunger. Not just the surface-level hunger for approval, but the profound hunger to be truly deeply known by another human being. If this conversation felt true for you both sides of it, you're always welcome here. You can subscribe to Leone Patterns and keep sitting with us.
It's an ongoing journey, really, of learning that your inner life doesn't have to stay heavily guarded in order to remain safely connected.
Think about this as you go about your day. If you are the low-maintenance person who never complains, who fixes everyone else's problems and never has needs of your own, what if your intense, ironclad self-sufficiency is actually depriving the people who love you of the exact vulnerability they need to feel less lonely themselves?